Okay, I understand there's various knowledge levels here, and I need to be very basic. I've got quite a few things to talk about, so if you have questions, if you could hold them until the end, I'd appreciate it. But anyway, FD&S, Fraud Detection National Security, what's in a name, right? Well, we picked a name that would accurately reflect what the goals and objectives and responsibilities were. To give you a little history, it's a byproduct of the abolishment of legacy Immigration and Naturalization Service as we stood up the new Department of Homeland Security. And it's also a result of 911. Obviously, immigration in a post-911 world is different as well as most other things. So the reason FD&S was created is because when Congress created DHS, it broke up and separated the enforcement and services components that were in the Legacy Immigration Naturalization Service, INS, and also broke up the Legacy Customs Service. They put the enforcement components together under Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and then the land border, the air, land, and sea border, and the Border Patrol into CBP, Customs Border Patrol. The remaining, the benefits side of the house, went into USCIS and Ship and Immigration Services. So this kind of presented a dilemma. So here we are, as validated by the 911 Commission years later, in finding that the terrorists of 911 manipulated and abused the legal immigration system, i.e. committed fraud to get into the country or to stay in the country for the primary purpose of doing us harm. And then here we are in a post-911 world creating an agency to administer the benefits, the services, without any enforcement or intelligence components. Kind of a duh moment, okay? So given my experience, as mentioned, many years managing, I was an immigration officer as well earlier in my career, but managing the enforcement and benefits side of the house for many years. I was also a former associate commissioner, senior executive service policy, in charge of policy and program development in Legacy INS, and a former district director in the field administering investigations, detention, deportation, and the benefits programs. Okay, so with that said, they asked me to come in because they were kind of like trading, if you would. Where are the Legacy INS and Customs people going to go? Well, I was recruited by CIS to come in and research the apparent void that was left in a post-911 world. That void, as I just mentioned, a services agency without any enforcement intelligence. So in doing about 6 months, almost a year of research, what we came up with was the need to develop an administrative component that would take the lead in detecting, deterring, preventing, and combating fraud, and separating the higher level major conspiracy criminal type of fraud out and refer it to ICE, the criminal enforcement arm of the department. Because what we learned later, and I've got a lot to talk about, so I'm kind of condensing this, what we learned through a number of studies is that the overwhelming majority of the fraud that exists is lower level 1 and 2 party fraud, not the type of fraud an assistant U.S. attorney is likely to take for criminal prosecution. Hence why no one opposed the creation of an administrative body like Fraud Detection and National Security. Now, the overall focus, mission, if you will, of FD&S was screening. And screening to ensure that people that were granted benefits weren't committing fraud, and to ensure that they didn't pose a threat to national security and public safety. So you've got two primary components there. Background checks, which comes under the penumbra of screening, and benefit fraud. So here we are standing this new organization up, and we have no operation, so we have to hire people, we have to train people, we have to develop policies, procedures. We needed data right away because Legacy INS didn't leave any type of empirical data. They had never done any studies or analyses of benefit fraud. So we were starting from scratch. So we developed a benefit fraud assessment program and an administrative site and verification program. What are they? Obviously, benefit fraud assessment. We focused on applications. We did about 8 or 9 assessments overall. We started with religious workers because of, at the time, the concern about the religious abuse of the religious worker fraud. And then we went into employment-based, non-immigrant and immigrant, temporary and permanent, marriage, asylum, et cetera. And when we took a statistical sampling of cases over a 6-month period, and then we went out and did site visits, which is sending FDNS officers out to the field in the community to knock on the doors and talk to the business, talk to the religious denominations, or in a case of marriage, talk to the marriage petitioner and beneficiary or employment-based, and ask specific questions that were geared towards validating the information provided on the petition. Are they truly living together in a husband and wife relationship? Are they employed in the capacity and the location as certified by the labor? Are they being paid the fee they're supposed to be being paid? Those kind of things. What we found in the benefit fraud assessment program is overwhelming fraud, double digits in almost every area, okay? When we were doing them inside internally, it was tremendous help, but once they started being disclosed publicly, there was a lot of opposition, a lot of pressure, and you can't really do anything in the immigration world without either an advocate or an opponent. And then you really can't pull data out of any immigration system, and I'll stand by this today, that doesn't have issues. Okay, so obviously we had some methodology issues. We had some issues. We go to pull cases. We statistical random sampling using general accounting principles, working with the experts. We go to find the files, and you can't find 25% of them. So you got to pull other cases. And then there's people, critics saying, oh, foul, that destroyed the legitimacy of your check. We had all those kind of issues. So I won't say they weren't without question. And I will admit that the FDNS, including myself standing this up, are not scientists. We're more operational people and managers standing this up, okay? But we needed the data, and we needed it quick. So the benefit fraud assessment program was absolutely essential to get the data that identified the volume of fraud, the type of fraud that existed, the causes, and what corrective actions and other solutions could possibly be taken. You also need that data to develop your policies and procedures and the business rules needed to develop your systems, your technology, to include analytics software. So you cannot combat fraud without data. And in today's world, with the available technology, you cannot do it without technology. So you need data and you need technology, and you need to do it, unlike all the years past, you need to do it smartly and intelligently. Okay? The other thing you need to do is continue this administrative site visit and verification program. Now, when I created it, we only had 100 FDNS officers the first couple years. Imagine that, with all the fraud, right? So I led a contract where we hired and trained contractors, because keep in mind that these random sampling, whether they're benefit fraud assessments or site visit programs, are non-fraud based. They're really like a quality assurance integrity mechanism. So you could train, and this I might be not giving it as much credit as I should, but I used to always say I could train when my daughter was in high school, I used to say that I could train my daughter how to do these administrative site visits. Okay? So you go out and you validate the key information on the petition is what you're doing, and you provide a report and you send it back. Contractors make no judgments, no decisions. They're pure information collectors. That's all it was. Now, the agency got away from that after I left, and now they're using their very limited number of FDNS officers, which means they're doing less administrative site visits. They're no longer doing benefit fraud assessments. So, you really have to question, how concerned are you about fraud if you're not doing either one of those things, okay? Now, I know there has been movements towards resuming the assessments and a number of different analyses, and I applaud that effort. It should have been done years ago, but let's put it behind us. We've got to get that done, okay? So in the benefit fraud arena, every form contains fraud. It's just a matter of how much. Now, when we went back and did an analysis of the cases that we had performed benefit fraud assessments on so that we could evaluate how our corrective actions changed that, in the religious worker area, we had a 33% fraud rate that reduced it to single digits when we started doing the random site visits. In fact, we built in the requirement that we had to do pre-adjudication administrative site visits before the adjudicators could even adjudicate the petitions. We did that for religious workers. But the agency did not do that for the other petitions. So the way the samplings work are a percentage of approved cases so that we don't interfere with the process. We don't create backlogs. We take approved cases like the H1s, H2B, the distinguished workers, whatever, and we go out and see, are they working like they're supposed to, okay? That has also lowered the double-digit fraud rate that ranged from 16 to 21% in the H1 area and H2 area down into single digits. So it's also a good deterrent. So that's why I mentioned at the beginning, FD&S is not just about detection, it's about deterrence and prevention. And if you undertake the benefit fraud assessments, you perform administrative site visits, you put it on steroids and do a lot more, and that is going to be one heck of a deterrent, as well as get you the information you need so that you can keep a handle, your pulse on the organization to know the types of fraud that exist. Because what we also learned is as you correct or focus on one area, the fraudsters, if you will, do not disappear. They go somewhere else. It's like squeezing the end of a balloon. The air is just dispersed. So you have to stay on top of this, and you have to stay ahead of it if you can. And with today's technology, it's much less challenging than it used to be. But what it does do is take a commitment. It truly takes a commitment. And now I'm going to talk about the other side of the screening, the background checks. We focused initially on the fraud, but we had to quickly focus on screening because we're in a post-911 world, and we implemented for the very first time in the history of immigration a biographic background check requirement for all applicants and petitioners. So we went from ground zero background checks on the overwhelming majority. There's an average of 6 to 7 million applications receipts a year. Only about 1.5 to 2 million were actually getting FBI fingerprint and name checks. So we had to stand up the capability using technology, had to stand that up, and had to work with the appropriate enforcement and intelligence components and with the technology experts at the department and in our own organization, and working with Customs, CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, because they own the text communication system. That is the basic line to various law enforcement and intelligence data sets, as well as the terrorist screening database. So all of a sudden, we went from 0 to 33 million text checks a year. And why, when you only get 5 to 7 million applications? Well, foreign names, there are different variations, et cetera. And their validity was only 6 months long. So once we did a background check, if the case stayed pending for 6 months, it had to have another background check. All right. Now, years when we set this up, we weren't as automated, and there were a tremendous number of false positives. What does that mean? I give an analogy of an onion. You have to peel the onion. Your first response is going to be overwhelming. You got all these hits, and you think, oh my God, all these potential national security concerns. Well, what you find out is the majority of them are just false positives, given foreign names and everything. The problem in the system is then it goes off track into human hands, and you have to manually vet it with different agencies. And trying to get information out of different agencies, particularly enforcement and intelligence components, back 10 years ago was much different than it is today. Okay, it was almost a fight. You almost always had to involve counsel. It was difficult to get the information because, keep in mind, CIS, FD&S is a non-law enforcement agency. While we're enforcing, not in the traditional sense of badge and gun carrying agents with arrest authority. You see, the focus, if I could distinguish it for you, administrative versus criminal. Our objective in CIS for the administrative anti-fraud program is to validate the information, verify whether the suspicion of fraud is accurate. If not, do your report, send it over to the adjudicator to approve the case. If it is, send it to the adjudicator with a report so that they can render the appropriate adjudication. An FD&S offer does not make a recommendation. They're fact finders. They tell it like it is. It's up to the adjudicator. Of course, most of the time it'll be denied either based on fraud or for other reasons that we determine, okay? But after it's denied, unlike ICE, the administrative side places the individual in removal proceedings. They do not present the case to a U.S. attorney for prosecution. So the Criminal side, ICE, when they open a criminal investigation, their objective upon proving fraud is to indict, convict, incarcerate, serve the sentence, then remove. You see, it's a big difference. And it takes considerably more resources. And because it's a criminal full-field investigation, there's a lot more put into it, if you will, than an administrative side. So that's the clear difference. Now, with the screening side of it, we built systems. Today, I mean, when I retired in late 2011, we had it fully electric. We had worked through with all the government agencies involved, FBI, the different intelligence components, State Department, Interpol even. What we learned was you had to place FD&S officers in those agencies with the appropriate clearances and access to the information to get over this battle, because you'll never have remote outside access to their systems. So we did that, and once the agencies learned we weren't a threat and that we were able to identify the information that we needed and cut through all the other info we didn't need, we could get it quicker, and they didn't get the pressure that they weren't releasing the info. We had them clear the release, and then you can get the information to the adjudicators to render a decision. And this is particularly important on national security hits. So because we have this label called known or suspected terrorists, KSTs, and these are the primary group that you need to vet the cases by FD&S officers. So when I retired, we had FD&S officers in 13 different agencies, including the Terrorist Screening Center, the National Counterterrorist Center, and the overwhelming majority of FBI-led local JTTFs, Joint Terrorism Task Forces. So we were equipped to get the information we needed, to review it, to determine if it pertained to the adjudicative decision eligibility, and if it did, to get the information and give it to the adjudicator. We also developed a senior level National Security Review Board. We did not want to place the responsibility of making decisions on known or suspected terrorists on field adjudicators. So after it's thoroughly vetted and we get the information, and most of it's classified, and most of it is you cannot use yet because it might be a pending ongoing investigation, and there's all sorts of limitations as to how you can use that information. So that's why we bring those cases in. CIS is still doing that today. They bring the cases in. FD&S takes the lead on vetting all the information and presenting it to the Senior Leadership Review Board, which includes the Deputy Director of the agency and senior executives of field operations, service center operations, FD&S, and they sit there and they review the case and they make the decision on what to do. That's how important that is. So that's your screening. What I also learned in the screening process is, and something I strongly recommend, and I don't know if this is being done, but recurrent or perpetual vetting, if you will. When I was there, the council opinion was we didn't really have the authority to continue to perform background checks on individuals once we grant them the benefit. That was being addressed at the time I left. If it hasn't been addressed satisfactorily, I continue to take the position, given the cases that I've seen, and you read them in the public, about the number of people who immigrated as refugees or dependents of refugees or immigrated based on a marriage or whatever. They naturalize or they got their green cards, and then later they are added to the terror screening database. So what we were doing, and we developed the capability to do it, it was just not flipped on, which would be to use the text system, the CBP system, to continue to just bounce the biographical data on all foreign nationals that were granted a benefit against just the terror screening database, okay, for terrorists, to bounce it against that in a recurring, perpetual way, at least until 5 years after naturalization. And the reason why I picked the 5 years is because there's a statute that actually makes naturalized citizens subject to denaturalization if they engage in terrorist activities up to 5 years post-naturalization. So I know I went over my time.